Hi, everyone. Welcome to the episode 2 of Andy Ngo's Weekly Notice. I appreciate all of your patience last week with all of the initial uh, bumps and hiccups, but I think I'm getting the hang of it now. Um, so I'm looking forward to tonight's episode. And by the way, last week I did get a chance to get to the Q&As. How I did take note of some of the questions, so I will be getting to those tonight. Um, Thank you for those who left comments last week. Okay, let's see. Lots of news happening this week, and I have lots of thoughts to share with you. I'm excited for tonight. Um, Please comment with questions or interesting statements, whatever, during this live stream. It goes for about an hour. And towards the last segment of the show, I will be getting to the questions. I have some tea with me. Here you go. So you've probably seen in some of my video interviews, I have quite a large porcelain china set in the background, and it's a hobby that I developed probably in the last, I would say, year. Um, it I think it's actually really important for people who work in politics or news writing related to politics to be able to have interests that are completely unrelated. Um, you can imagine that the type of work that I do is really, really stressful, and that I um, come under constant attack, and both literal as well as through death threats, etc. So the whole tea hobby has been a bit of an escape for me, and so and it's one that I genuinely enjoy, and appreciate that I get to share it with you tonight. So the first episode was dedicated to all the Antifa or Antifa adjacent individuals that were convicted just in the last month. And there were a lot. I think I outlined 5 individuals last time. Well, there was more that I didn't get to. So um, let's go to the first case to highlight, because the conviction actually just happened at the end of March. Okay, pull up the screen. Okay. Let me disable the picture in the background. Sorry, it's a little distracting. There we go. Okay. So this is the case of Samuel Young out of Aurora, Colorado. He was filmed in 2020 firing several rounds at a driver who was trying to flee from a mob of BLM and communist rioters in Aurora, Colorado. And he was finally convicted. He was found guilty at a trial. And let me pull up the story that a colleague did. Okay. Okay. And I'm just going to read from it. I think one of the feedback I got last is that things were a little bit rushed. And I'm going to try to find my pacing a bit more this time, go a bit more in depth for you. So this is on the Post Millennial, and this was written by my colleague Hannah Nightingale. So that's a booking photo, also known as a mugshot of Samuel from 2020. And this was published on April 2nd. So on Thursday, this was referring to a week and a half ago, Antifa shooter Samuel Young was found guilty of 7 counts stemming from a July 2020 shooting on an Aurora, Colorado highway. Young was found guilty of 4 counts of attempted manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree assault, and 1 count of illegal discharge of a firearm. I reported on Samuel's arrest back in 2020, and I'm just gonna play the video because it's quite. You just need to see what happened. Or I'll continue reading the story first. Actually, Young's trial began on March 22nd, with the jury beginning its deliberations on Thursday morning. Young will be sentenced on May 17th. So he's been found guilty. He hasn't been sentenced yet. So once he's sentenced, I'll do another follow up on that. But as you remember from last week, most of the people, the 5 people that were some of those who were convicted or sentenced last month, they had rather light sentences for a number of reasons. On July 25th, 2020, Young was among a crowd protesting the death of Elijah McClain, who died after a police encounter. The group at one point moved down East Alameda Avenue and onto the highway, which had to be closed down. A Jeep was traveling down the highway, and some protesters jumped out of the way to avoid it. Police said there were no reports of anyone being injured by the vehicle. In response, Young fired at the Jeep but missed, instead striking 2 fellow Black Lives Matter protesters. One man was shot in the leg and another was grazed on the head by a bullet. Both went to the hospital for their injuries. So, what's a bit shocking about this case is that not only was he recklessly potentially trying to kill this driver, who was lawfully driving on a highway that they had shut down at a riot, by the way. But he was so bad with his aim or reckless that he shot 2 of his comrades. Fortunately, nobody died. And I'm just going to pull up the video so you can see. So this is from July 2020 in Aurora, Colorado.
Shit. What was that? Yo, is everybody okay over there? Holy shit. There's a cop that, excuse me. Holy shit. Shit.
Okay, so you can see from the video there's some Antifa and Black Bloc. This was like coalition direct action, or I would call it an armed attempted uprising by communists and Antifa and their allies. And this was not an isolated incident. You may recall that there were so many times that the rioters would just go onto a highway and try to shut things down, and many times they became injured. In Seattle, there was a far left activist who was part of a group that tried shutting down the highway at a violent direct action, and a driver, an African immigrant, plowed through them, seriously injured one, and unfortunately killed one of the women. And so this was one of the incidents in Aurora that played out in a similar manner, although the driver didn't injure anyone, and the driver was fortunate to make it out alive. You can see in the video the number of rounds that were fired. I'm going to pull up some photos of the now convicted gunman, Antifa gunman. This is from my Instagram, by the way. I do have an Instagram, as you can see, Real Andy Ngo. I'm sorry that I don't have the same consistent name through everything. Sometimes I want to use a certain name and it's already been taken. So I do have an Instagram, and it's mostly stuff in my work. So please follow me there. So this is his mugshot that you've seen of Samuel Young. This was an image. I apologize, I don't know the name of the photographer who took this, but you see him aiming his pistol and shooting here. And then, yeah, that's him on the ground. So another Antifa violent criminal convicted. And I will follow up with you once the sentencing happens next month. So in addition to in addition to the live streaming work that I do, you might know me before from some of my video on the ground coverage, and then of course like my reporting that happens on social media. I also do column writing, writing for print, and I had a piece that just came out yesterday on Newsweek that I'm excited to share with you. But before I get to that, I'm just going to answer a few of the questions from last week that I didn't get to. And so one of them, the first one, this was from Daisy. She asked me, "Are you concerned Antifa will start up again this summer?" That's a good question. I get asked that usually, every year for the last few years. Am I concerned? The timing doesn't. The season doesn't really matter. What matters is if there's a larger narrative or an incident that they can exploit, and that's really important, by the way. So, the riots of 2020 were sparked across the U.S. because of extremists on the left and their allies in the mainstream left exploiting the death of George Floyd. America is a country of in excess, I believe, of 360 million people. So you can imagine how many interactions that citizens have with law enforcement there are in the country. And unfortunately, there are some where a police officer, somebody who's in the custody of a police officer, ends up dying. And sometimes the person is black. And when this happens in public, when there's a video that comes out, the video is stripped of context, it's framed in a way that's inflammatory, and then you have people who spread certain claims that are later disproven on social media, and it spreads like wildfire. You can see it happening over and over for all of the for all that we've heard about the dangers of misinformation or out of context information or disinformation on social media. You don't see big tech doing anything to address when leftists or far leftists use misinformation to spread discord, to incite violence, to incite riots, and to organize riots. So regarding this summer, do I think just because it's summer that violence will happen? No. In terms of how season affects rioting in the far left, is that they are more likely to riot when the weather is more favorable. And that's mostly because more people show up. The number of militants are like violent militant extremists, the ones who are actually involved in planning and organizing the riots, they're most likely going to show up really regardless of the weather, particularly in places where they're really extreme, like Seattle and Portland and Oakland. But they're less effective when their numbers are so small, right? They're vulnerable. It's easier for law enforcement to surround them, to pick them off. But so what they really need are human shields. And I've written about this in my book, Unmasked. And if you look at some of the literature, that's one of their strategies for being more effective, is to incite rage in people so that liberals show up in mass. And then within that, they can embed in a larger group and be more effective at carrying out violence, at carrying out arson. So I feel like America is kind of under the sword of Damocles, and that it doesn't take very much for a video clip of some law enforcement interaction involving a black person to go viral. And when things align, you can see the amount of violence that breaks out. And certainly everything that we should have learned from more than 2 years ago weren't learned. And in fact, the same individuals and groups who are involved in organizing violence and fundraising for rioters are still all there. In fact, they've become more effective, I would argue. And law enforcement are still dealing with the effects of being defunded and demoralized. So um, that's my best answer to the question. The next one: can Antifa be named as a terrorist group? I get asked this one a lot as well, or people bring it up in a statement that Antifa is a terrorist group. So, speaking strictly in the American context, can Antifa be named as a terrorist group? The answer is no, and that's because of the First Amendment. It's for the same reason that various neo-Nazi groups that exist in the United States cannot be banned. When the U.S. labels groups terrorist groups that are outlawed, these are groups that have an international presence. For example, like Al Qaeda or Islamic State or Al Shabaab. Any of these groups that are primarily involved in terrorism on the international level, but domestic extremist groups cannot be banned simply based on their ideology because of the First Amendment. There are pros and cons to that. There are countries, most of the countries in Western Europe, actually, and maybe even all of them, have within their laws the ability for the state to ban certain groups based on the group's violent extremist views. Last month, for example, the equivalent of the Home Secretary in France um, made steps to ban the Lyon chapter of Antifa, and this was the first time it's happened. They didn't move to ban the organization entirely across the country, just in one city, but that particular city and the surrounding area in Lyon has been particularly violent. So the state can, for example, in France or in Germany, in the UK, ban certain groups outright. Um, you so this all comes down to like weighing pros and cons. It's do you want to give the state the ability to be able to ban certain groups based on their ideology? Well, if you can trust the government to have a very high standard that has to be met before a group is banned, then maybe. But as we can see in the U.S., um, we have partisan actors. I would say primarily Democrats who really want to see so many ideologies and groups banned, but because they can't do it, they're outsourcing the banning to big tech. And that's a whole nother discussion, but it's something I've been thinking about and something that I feel people don't aren't speaking about a bit more. Is like, they just kind of, the debate usually when it comes around censorship and big tech, people just say like, well, it's a private company, they can do what they want next. And it's like, well, yes, that's true according to how the law is interpreted right now, but we're seeing those in government lean into big tech to do censorship for partisan purposes. For example, the Hunter Biden story that was in the New York Post that you couldn't share on Twitter. That was because of people in the administration reaching out to big tech and saying that this needed to be banned. Right now on Facebook, Meta, you cannot share the story that the New York Post did on Patrisse Cullors, who's one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. You may recall there was an investigative bombshell story that came out about how she has this multi-million-dollar property empire, and Facebook doesn't allow you to share that right now on the basis that it's harassment. And if you look at a really great report that just came out in New York Magazine about Black Lives Matter buying another huge property in Southern California worth $6.3 million, I believe. You can see in it that the reporter, and I apologize, I blank on his name right now. He's incredible. It's an incredible piece. You must read it. Based on leaked chats from a signal group of Black Lives Matter leaders, they talked about how they would reach out to their contacts in big tech to get them to essentially help them censor stories or information that Black Lives Matter leaders found damaging to them individually or the group. Okay, third question that was asked last week by CCPD Delando. Andy, do you have your reporting info archived and in a single location? Short answer, no, because I write for a number of publications. I would say if I had to pick one, it would be my Twitter. But Twitter is not organized in a way where you can easily access stuff that's old. I would say, at least for the past year and a half, if you want to see what I've done and stay on top of my work, please join me on ngo.locals.com. You can make a free account, and there are thousands of people who do. And if you want to support me by pledging $5 a month or as much as you want, that's really, really helpful. Those of you who are listening or watching right now who have done any journalism or column writing, you'll know that this industry doesn't, you don't get rich off this type of work. There's not a lot of money to be made. People who are reading news stuff want things for free. And so, more and more, that's why you see all these news places have paywalls now, because people just aren't willing to pay, and then the effect down the line is that then writers are not paid as well, or paid low. One of the ways you can help not just me but other independent journalists is to support. I also have a Patreon and Subscribestar, and so I appreciate anything you can do to help with that. Okay, back to this week's weekly notice. Okay. So I also do, I contribute to Newsweek, and I wrote a piece that was published yesterday about a viral hoax incident that played out primarily on Twitter. And similar stuff has happened quite a lot, involving really usually the same actors. So earlier this week, on Monday, there was a man named, let me pull up the story for you. Okay, just so you can see it. 1 second. Okay. So this is my column in Newsweek that you can read right now. Democratic influencers, media figures spread fake Tucker Carlson quote. So on Monday, a former Republican, now turned Democrat social media activist, Joe Walsh. He was a congressman in Illinois for the Republican Party. He just served one term, and now he's mostly tweeting. He tweeted out a quote that he attributed to Tucker Carlson on Monday, essentially that repeated Russian propaganda and talking points about its denial of any war crimes that it committed in Ukraine. And this fake quote, was taken at face value by a number of journalists, so-called fact checkers, and many American Democrat Party politicians, unfortunately, people who repeated this and used it to malign Tucker and to call for Fox News to be banned or to be labeled as foreign propaganda, for Tucker Carlson to be branded a foreign operative. And all of it was based on a lie, on something that it wasn't like even a misquote. It was a completely made up quote. He said nothing of the matter, and he didn't say anything even similar to that on his show. I'm going to read my piece. On Monday, former Republican and ex-Congressman Joe Walsh fabricated a quote on Twitter. It immediately caught the attention of Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans who hope to see the Fox News host canceled. Walsh attributed the following statement to Carlson. What if these bodies of tortured, dead civilians were staged? What if they're fake? What if the Ukrainian military killed them and then blamed Russia? I'm not saying any of this is true. I'm just asking the questions. Why can't we ask these questions? Unquote. The quote repeating Russia's propaganda and denial of war crimes in Bucha, Ukraine, instantly went viral. On Reddit, a screenshot of Walsh's post has nearly 60,000 upvotes, with thousands of comments decrying what users believe are Carlson's traitorous views. But Twitter is where the fake quote found currency among powerful and influential figures close to the Democratic Party. The list of those who spread the fake quote is a who's of Democratic boosters, politicians, journalists. It includes former Trump impeachment prosecutor Daniel Goldman, MSNBC host Joanne Reed, Daily Beast columnist Wajahat Ali, and Obama White House Deputy Chief of Staff Alyssa Mastromonaco. Numerous media figures appear to take the fake quote at face value. It should trouble every American the right wing and Trump are in absolute sync and have been with Putin, tweeted Luke Zaleski, legal affairs editor and fact checker at global media company Condé Nast, which owns The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, GQ, Teen Vogue, and other publications. Their talking points and anti-democratic actions and agendas are antagonistic to the rule of law and ongoing, and have led to 2 impeachments and an attack on Congress, end quote. Richard Oyeda, spokesman for No Dem Left Behind, a PAC which helps elect Democratic candidates in rural areas, tweeted, quote, I understand freedom of speech, but in World War II, they shaved the heads of women who crawled in bed with the enemy. I think it's time to pull out the clippers. Piss on Tucker Carlson. Joanne Reed, who has a history of spreading misleading information for partisan purposes, accused her broadcast host competitor of getting his show scripts straight from the Kremlin or the GRU, Russia's foreign military intelligence agency. In March of last year, she similarly accused Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson of being an agent of Moscow. Anti-Trump activist and writer Amy Siskind called on Fox News and its owner Rupert Murdoch to take Carlson's show off the air in response to Walsh's fake Carlson quote. This was not Siskind's first time falling for a hoax either. In February 2021, Siskind posted a threatening email she allegedly received that she falsely attributed to this writer, me. It wasn't only left-wing partisans who fell for the made-up quote. Anti-Trump Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger wrote, quote, I gotta say, if Carlson is not a Russian asset, he should be. He's absolutely overqualified for the job. Is he a Russian asset? I don't know, just asking questions, end quote. The Fox News host had previously mocked Kinzinger on air for sharing a photoshopped meme of the Ghost of Kiev pilot the congressman appeared to believe was authentic. We've seen Democrats and their allies spread misinformation and conspiracy theories in hopes of smearing their political opponents before, even after those claims have been debunked. Michael Wolff's 2018 anti-Trump bestseller, Fire and Fury, printed sensational quotes and anecdotes that were quickly rejected as fake by those they implicated, but they were nonetheless amplified on mainstream media because they rang true. Late on Monday night, Walsh recycled this defense. He admitted he fabricated the quote and defended his action. I was predicting what Tucker Carlson would say tonight. It's exactly the kind of thing Putin lover Tucker would and has said. But what rings true is not the same as the truth. It wouldn't even have been hard for the journalists, politicians, and activists who spread this fabricate meant to damage Carlson's reputation to fact-check the tweet. Walsh's fake quote was posted hours before Tucker Carlson Tonight aired on Monday night. Those who scream and shout the loudest about stopping misinformation have no issue spreading it themselves when it's their cause. For all of Twitter's promises to fight misinformation, the fabricated quote remains online without a disclaimer as of this writing. Democratic and Republican war hawks agitating for an American military confrontation with Russia view Carlson's anti-war stance as a threat. Unable to get the popular primetime Fox News host canceled, they've turned to spreading falsehoods to frame him as an agent of the Kremlin. But Carlson's skepticism of both Ukrainian and Russian officials' claims since the war began is not the same as being pro-Kremlin. And while he's only one man, mischaracterizing his views or making outlandish claims about his arguments stifles debate about a foreign policy issue that could bring far broader consequences. So I was motivated to write this piece because before I did the Antifa beat, I wrote a lot about hate crime hoaxes and how misinformation spreads. And most of the time, we've seen how left wing journalists have made the terms and concepts misinformation and disinformation political and partisan. They frame it in a way as really only occurring of any scale on the right, when that's inaccurate. Um, I would say and argue that Black Lives Matter boosters and supporters and members and leaders spread conspiracy theories that are false. They spread false claims um, that should be treated in the same way that a lot of so-called right-wing misinformation is treated, in that it should be fact-checked. But the issue is now the whole fact-checking industry is compromised. You see over and over that when these so-called fact-checkers, whether they be Snope or others who are contracted to do fact-checking for Facebook and others in big tech, that their mistakes, when they happen, run in one direction, which is to follow their own bias, which is a bias against the right, and to really enforce what is liberal and left wing orthodoxy. Um, let's see, I'm going to show some of the screenshots of some of the things that some of the people who spread this fake quote, what they said, because some of it was just so outrageous. I mean, look at this woman. Randy Mayans singer. She's a really successful, I believe she's a screenwriter. She's had some very successful films. Holy effing S word at Tucker Carlson, now sounding like a Holocaust denier. Look at that. No subtlety there in what she had to say. This woman, Danielle Moody. This is why I keep calling on the goddamn FCC. Fox News is a threat to national security. Their shows should come with the distinct warning labels as we do for violence and nudity. Needs to be done for Fox News, period. Also, that POS needs to be removed from air. Hashtag woke AF. This guy, I quoted him in my column. So he posted this paragraph talking about how the right wing and Trump are anti-democratic and a threat to democracy and liberalism in America. And he's a legal affairs editor for a huge media company that owns a whole bunch of publications. I listed like 6 of them in my piece. And he was a longtime research director for GQ magazine. So, these so-called, fact checkers and people who think that they are smarter and better than us and can lecture us and more morally wag their finger, they are just as easily falling to what I call, in this instance, I would call it a hoax from Joe Walsh, right? Um, this one's a bit disturbing. This person who amplified it, Daniel Goldman. Daniel Goldman was the impeachment prosecutor against Trump, and he's a former federal prosecutor, and he served as as counsel to the House Democrats. So, yeah, the fact that you've had now, the long list of people who fell for the hoax include people who such power and such influence in this country. I think that's the more disturbing part that I was trying to get at in my column. It's not just that people retweeted something that was fake. That happens all the time. It's that it included like those sort of the highest echelons of American politics and American media were spreading this. Okay. Next. So you may have heard that Elon Musk is now on the board for Twitter. And that's a really big deal. Like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, he he was tweeting out these things that were a bit cryptic. He was basically asking about, is the principle of free speech um, being honored? And it made a lot of people speculate that he was thinking of either buying Twitter or buying lots of stocks of Twitter or starting his own social media alternative. So what happened is that um, basically overnight he bought almost a tenth of the stocks of Twitter, and because he bought so much, he now has a spot on the board. And as much as Twitter has claimed to have a neutral enforcement policy, you can see, as a user, you can see that's not true because of how the direction that their censorship goes in and the things that they consider, for example, hate speech or hateful conduct, is enforcing a certain progressive orthodoxy. That's very clear. Um, we don't know much about the internal discussions or the internal culture at Twitter, but unsurprisingly, it's left wing, and not just left wing. I would say hard left. And you can see now what I did was once Elon Musk had purchased purchased over 9% of the stocks. Many of the employees of Twitter were having a public meltdowns on their own Twitter accounts. Um, it's I'm surprised that I think I was the first one to catalog these, and I did screenshots because I knew they would either delete it or make their account private or anything. But none of this was like private information. It was information they put out, and they prominently display that they are Twitter employees in one way or the other. But I'm just gonna read some of them for you. So here, so this is from Cassie Nick Rumbach, and she's a male to female transsexual data scientist who works at Twitter. She had wrote two things. She wrote, a prominent transphobe buying a large stake in Twitter is not at all funny. And in response to her own tweet, she wrote, I'm honestly kind of terrified right now. She posted a crying emoji. And this is her bio at the time that I took the screenshots. Yeah. Pay attention to the pronouns. You'll see that that's very consistent in the reactions from many of the Twitter employees. This person, Gerard Taylor, he's one of the senior software engineers at Twitter. So this was his response. My current sentiment, stock is up. Yay. But what about our company culture? You see. He, him. Yeah. This is you get kind of similar reactions whenever people on the left feel that they are potentially about to lose power. Is that they talk about things like, what about our company culture? What about what we've cultivated? Basically, there's a certain sense of entitlement with a lot of progressives and leftists who work at powerful institutions, who they feel that that this is like their right. It's their right that this company remains politically aligned to what we want. And when that's challenged, they have meltdowns. Here, this is from Jerry Kidd. She's one of the recruiting managers for Twitter. She was a bit more subtle in her response. Looks like I picked a good week to be off. No regrets, regrets, I should say. Yep. She, her. Hashtag Black Lives Matter on her profile. This one, I'm going to talk about Jay Holler. But first, I'm going to show you. So, Jay Holler is one of the engineering managers at Twitter, and he had probably the most prominent meltdown, I think, of any employee, at least that I saw. Hashtag Black Lives Matter, he, him, his. Yeah, it's a cliche, I could say. Okay. This is his picture. Following Elon Musk joining the board for Twitter, one of the company's engineering managers had down. Jay Holler complained to the CEO about Musk's transphobia and then disparaged the CEO in a Twitter space. During the BLM Antifa riots in 2020, Holler donated to help violent rioters in Minnesota. This is a post from my locals, by the way, ngo.locals.com. It's called the no-go zone. So you can see many of the things that I talked about tonight are all on there for you to see a free account. I'm going to like look how bold some of these people are. It's that sense of entitlement I was talking about, that they feel that the position they have is not just the right one, the moral one, but if you deviate from it or you disagree, you don't just disagree with them. You're a seriously morally flawed person. And then some of the more radical people believe that you are so morally flawed that you should be punished with pain, with being fired or being injured, maimed, or even killed for your views. And with that, I'm referring to those who would have those reactions would be Antifa. Okay, here. So yeah, Jay Holler, after I screenshotted him, he like locked down his account, but I have archives of what he posted. So look, he tagged the CEO Parag of Twitter and asked him, "How do you feel about the anti-trans rhetoric posted by a new board member here less than 30 days ago?" And then he posted this pretty innocuous tweet that Elon Musk posted. See, can you see it? Netflix waiting for the war to end to make a movie about a black Ukraine guy falls in love with a transgender Russian soldier. So Jay Holler was very, very offended by this. And like most people who are working professionally, you would not feel emboldened to publicly disparage not just a board member, but also the CEO. He had a Twitter space where he and another person were saying disparaging things about Parag. It's just, it shows a sense of entitlement, I think, and unprofessionalism. They probably feel like untouchable, that they can't be fired for having these radical leftist views. He also posted that, and this was the quote, that he was radicalized by Elon Musk being on the board now. I think he was just being dramatic because you look at his social media posts or what you could see before he locked it down. He had already been radical for a very long time. He did say that he was, this whole thing has broken him. Broken. That was the quote. And these are people, having control over the public square in the United States and in many countries around the world. Here we go. So earlier I mentioned that he had donated to rioters in 2020. So here's the tweet I found. So from Jay Holler, one of the engineering managers at Twitter. "We can't get into the street to protest this time, but Anna Holler and I just agreed to donate to the cause because it's important. Hashtag Black Lives Matter until we all belong." It's a donation receipt. You don't know how much he gave. But the group he was responding to and giving money to was the Minnesota Freedom Fund. Does that ring a bell, everybody? That was the group that Kamala Harris promoted the donation link for, and they raised some $35 million for every sort of violent criminal that was arrested in Minnesota. That included not just accused violent rioters and arsonists, but also accused murderers, accused rapists. This is, yeah, nobody's really been held to account for that, right? Like, nobody's even bothered to ask Twitter, how do you feel about one of your employees donating to such an extremist cause? Kamala, Vice President Kamala now, why did you support that last year? Um, okay. So one of the segments that I'm gonna do in each of my live streams is called the hate hoax of the week, hate hoaxer of the week. So uh, America, you hear a lot that America has an epidemic. You hear that term of hate crimes, and white supremacists carrying out hate crimes is an epidemic in America. And that type of rhetoric was really amplified after Trump won in 2016, and all these grifting so-called nonprofit charities made a hell of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars off fear mongering, making people think that America had elected a fascist, and now that people of color and sexual minorities were now just being killed left and right. It was completely bogus, but people believed it, and organizations made money off of it, and it further fueled the incentive for faking hate crimes. Um, some of the ways you can identify hate crimes, and in 2019 I went on Dr. Phil to discuss this on the show with Ben Shapiro. I might try to play the clip next week if you haven't seen it yet, but it was right after Jussie Smollett was at that time accused to be a hate crime hoaxer. But one of the things that is emblematic of a likely fake hate crime, hate hoax, is that the story is very cinematic and very sensational, and that the alleged victim doesn't go to law enforcement or is reluctant to, but has no issue broadcasting the alleged incident and claims on social media or to journalists. Those are like huge things that you should be aware of, by the way. And the majority of the time when they occur on university campuses, they're actually fake. I mean, we all know what university campus culture is like in America. These are not places where that are bastions of far right violent extremism. In fact, it's the other side, far left violent extremism. You'll see over and over university students, often in very privileged positions in life, feeling the need and desire to pretend to be a victim of a hate crime, either for sympathy or for um, support, for media attention. Quite often, the cases never get fully investigated. The university often will not name who was involved, or they won't name identifying details about the hate hoaxer. Makes me very frustrated as a journalist that information they will withhold from the public. But anyways, hate hoaxer of the week. Okay. Okay, the hate hoaxer of the week is UCLA's diversity director. Okay. And his name is Jonathan Perkins. And that's his picture on the left. He's wearing a shirt that says "Stop shooting us," and it repeats it a lot. This story, he got attention recently because he made some tweets where he says that he hopes Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas dies, and I don't even know how to really, like, what kind of state of mind do you have to be in, or how morally bankrupt to be to wish that a judge dies in America. and the fact that he's in a position of being the top diversity officer at a major university in America, wishing death on a ill black judge and thinking that that's morally the right position. Yeah, so he got attention for that. And I'm a UCLA alumnus, and it made me, I was disturbed to see this. And so I started digging into Jonathan Perkins' background. And what I found is not at all surprising. So, okay. This is an article in the Atlantic from 2011. Headline: UVA declines to charge student for false racial profiling claim. Law student gets a pass for publishing fabricated police harassment incident. And I'm just going to read it, part of it. In April, a University of Virginia third-year law student, Jonathan Perkins, wrote a letter to the editor of the Virginia Law Weekly where he described how he was harassed by university police while walking home one night due to being African American. The account is long and richly detailed, complete with dialogue between him and the officers and descriptions of his thought process during the events. And in the piece that he wrote to the letter to editor, he was describing how he was a victim of a hate crime by police at UVA. And then the campus and police investigated. Look at this. Unfortunately for Perkins, perhaps his story sparked too much discussion, leading to an investigation of the incident by university officials. So naturally, there was a huge outcry and fear and rage. This happens over and over. And this is what investigators found at the university. The incident never actually occurred, as Perkins himself has now admitted from the university press release available at Above the Law. I wrote the article to bring attention to the topic of police misconduct, he said in a written statement. The events in the article did not occur. Yeah. The university did not expel him. You want to talk about privilege? Yeah, think about that. This hate hoaxer escaped punishment and went on to fail upward. Ultimately, less than within a decade, making his way to being a high-level and high-paying UCLA administrator for diversion, inclusion, and equity. Why do we accept this? I don't know. Why do students accept this? Okay. I wanted to talk about an upcoming live event that I'm going to be a part of, and that all of you can join actually. Okay. So on Monday, that would be April 11th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, there's going to be a 570 KVI radio station in Seattle is hosting a panel event. It's titled Journalism on the Streets of America. and it's featuring myself. And let me just pull up the post I have. One moment. Okay, so I'll be speaking at this Seattle journalism event on Monday, April 11th at 6 p.m. Pacific. The event will also feature corporate reporters turned independent journalists Brandy Cruiser and Jonathan Cho. Cruiser was attacked by Antifa militants in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, Chaz, while doing broadcast coverage for Fox 13 Seattle in 2020. Jonathan Cho was an intrepid reporter for KOMO4 until just recently. He had become a target of threats by Antifa covering Seattle's homeless encampments. He then became the victim of a cancel campaign by Antifa and far-left activists who swarmed the TV station with false accusations that Cho is a white supremacist. The station caved into the demands he be fired. So I'll be on this panel. It's on Monday. You can find the description, more details on the event either on my locals or you can go to kvi.com for information about the event. It is a live event on April 11th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, and people can click a video link to be able to watch it online. So please join. I think when I was in Portland, I respect Brandy so much because she was with a corporate media station, but she was really just a straight shooter in her coverage of the violent extremism that was happening in Seattle. She was one of the people who covered Chaz and was harassed. And at one point, the militants surrounded her. And one of the militants who surrounded her was somebody who had made threats of violence against me before. I wrote about this in my book. So she's a very brave woman. Jonathan Cho, he's the Korean American journalist on the right. He, until very, very recently, was with KOMO4. You may recall, if you follow my reporting closely, that last month, I believe, I wrote a report about how Antifa on Twitter was saying that they wanted to make him the next me, in terms of they would harass and threaten him on the streets and would pursue him and be violent towards him. And they wanted to see him fired. So there was a organized campaign that took place on Twitter after he covered a Proud Boys event at the state capitol in Washington, and the accusations that people made in phone calls and emails to his station is that he was far right, neo-Nazi, white supremacist, all these lies, and the station just caved, cowardly. They gave in. So I'm really excited that I'll be joining other peers in this industry, because as an independent journalist, I don't often get to speak publicly with other people who do journalism. And so I'm really excited about this, and I hope you can join. So, okay, I'm going to go through some of the questions. Okay, so this is by Codename B. Do you think Antifa will become more extreme in their tactics as global warming is hyped more? That's an interesting question. Let me think about that. What surprised me during the pandemic with Antifa in America is that they were so not only were they willing to go along with the liberal establishment beliefs about COVID and its dangers to the public and the need for lockdowns and all these other draconian measures, COVID passes, etc. I was surprised that they were willing to enforce those beliefs with violence. That seemed to me out of character for their ideology, because their ideology at its core is anti-state and anti-authority. So here, this was, and you didn't see this in the same way in Western Europe, for example, with the Antifa there. But the American Antifa became violent enforcers of medical tyranny uh, on the population. And you saw that, and you still see this now happening, by the way, wherever there were like anti-mandate, anti-COVID related mandate type of protests, that Antifa would show up to threaten these people, to oppose them, to fight them. I mean, in Los Angeles last year, a Antifa member named Eric Cohen, a transsexual Antifa member, allegedly stabbed a Latino man in the chest and lacerated his heart outside the city hall in Los Angeles at an anti-mandate protest. And so they've carried out acts of violence in line with Democrat state ideology, I would say. That is surprising. So, well, do I think that their tactics will become more extreme as global warming is hyped more? I think what we've witnessed in the last 2 years is that governments in liberal democratic states in Western Europe, America, Australia, etc., will use the excuse of an emergency to bring about all these sort of draconian measures that restricts freedom. And I mean, emergencies do happen, and the state always has to consider all the variables in, when they take really big moves in restricting people's freedom of movement or right to assemble, etc. And it didn't seem like they were considering a lot of the variables when some of these decisions were made, and then the punishments were really severe. And then we saw over and over a lot of these officials who were in the decision-making process for enforcing these rules broke the rules themselves and faced really no consequence at all for any of it. So I think in the future, as climate change is framed more and more as an emergency that people need to do something about now, I think, if there were counter protests against any draconian measures in the future, I think it seems likely that Antifa would be on the side of the state in that regard. Okay. This question from Ebony. Andy, how do Antifa recruit? There's no one single line answer for that. The details of it are in my book, but broadly, just to simplify for the purposes of this, I would say their main recruiting tool is through social media. And then secondly is through their direct actions in various cities. So they'll organize direct actions, violent direct actions. They'll set a time and place where people can meet. They'll make digital flyers that are posted on primarily Twitter and also Instagram, disseminated. And then at these events, for example, like in Portland, before they would riot at night, they would gather a few hours earlier and do militancy training together, like proper formation techniques and tactics, how to assemble, how to properly, like, as a group, better efficiently use shields, and they'll disseminate the various weapons and projectiles for the comrades, and then there will be the literature that they'll bring, and the literature is given out very casually, and there are these booklets that are printed at home, Xerox copies essentially printed from the internet, and they can be a few pages long or even just front and back. And they distill basically their ideology down. And it's from there that it gives people an introduction to the extremist ideology. And from there, it draws people in who become more and more radicalized as they become further along in the journey. And then they're introduced to more extremist literature. So I would say you can compare the recruitment process very similarly to how jihadists recruit. Obviously there's no mosque or church that Antifa go to, but it's more of like the direct actions is where people know they can go and get introduced to the ideology and make new friends and comrades. and the way that the networks are structured, you can get a lot of support once you are deemed somebody who's in with the group. So if you are arrested for carrying out far left violence and you have to retain a defense attorney, you have to pay your bail, they'll cover all of that. Okay, and I'm just going to do one more question since we are past the hour now. Let's see. I really appreciate a lot of these questions are good. I think I'm going to have to go through some of them for the next episode. Okay. Bridget asked, did any of the Antifa members who attacked you ever get charged? There were a lot who attacked me. Most of them have escaped justice. So, which is why in 2020, I had to launch a civil lawsuit against those who were involved in assaulting me or attacking me in one way or another criminally in 2019. The viral video that everybody's seen by now of where I was punched repeatedly on the head and kicked and then doused with all the milkshakes. That happened now in June 2019. And law enforcement in the local county, prosecutors in Portland, didn't hold to account any of those people, even when my legal team turned over to them some of the people that we were able to identify. So we had to pursue it civilly. And I'll be talking, and you can, if you go on my locals account, you can see how you can give to the legal fund for that. Lawsuits in America are really, really expensive, which is why a lot of times the majority of times they settle out so early, or they don't even happen and people don't even get justice because they take so much money and so much time. And it's really hard for the plaintiffs, actually. Me here, I'm the victim, but it's like, the process is drawn out. The other side makes it as hard as they can. They have a lot of money that they can crowdsource on their side. A lot of people who are willing to back their causes. But one positive development that happened late last year is that one of the people who robbed me in 2019, John Hacker, he was indicted by a grand jury in Multnomah County. And it was a complete, I was just, I was able to at least take a little bit of a sigh of relief that, okay, one of them was indicted. Okay, 2.5 years later at that point. So that is being prosecuted by the district attorney's office in Multnomah County. So that is a criminal case. That's not a civil case against John Hacker. And I'll give updates when there are updates. You've probably seen his picture on my social media before. He's the one. I posted his mugshot before. He's a very, very dangerous man, and he had a role in my assault last year in May of 2021 when I returned to Portland and I was discovered because I was undercover, and then they they chased me throughout the town and beat me severely, made me hospitalized again. He was one of the ringleaders in that attack. So, most of the time, the moral, I guess, the short answer to this long answer to this question is that in Portland and other areas where a lot of the criminal justice system is quite compromised and the police departments are weak and ineffective, far left violent extremists can do a lot of crime with impunity. And if they are arrested and prosecuted, a lot of people will raise money for them, and they'll set up campaigns on GoFundMe. I brought attention to some of that on my Twitter. There's a person named Princess Unicorn who's running these GoFundMe campaigns where she doesn't say the name of the person she's raising the money for, but the people, based on the details that are in there, I publicly brought attention that they are those who are being prosecuted for violent felonies, which is in violation, by the way, of the terms of service of GoFundMe. GoFundMe, for example, infamously shut down the campaign for Kyle Rittenhouse because they say, we don't allow fundraising for legal defense for those who are accused of violent crimes. Well, okay, then why do you allow it for Antifa shooters, Antifa assailants, and Antifa militants who assault people and are charged and being prosecuted. Why do you allow that? I don't know. Well, I do know, and you know as well. But yeah. Okay. Whew. All right. Thank you everybody for tuning in to. I'm just getting a little more tea. Sorry, my teapot. Okay, I'm gonna relax a little bit. Thank you everyone for tuning in again to this live stream. I hope it's interesting. I'm not the most confident person. That's why a lot of writers you can see camera shy for that reason, right? We are more confident when we are writing and submit things and not being in front of the camera. But I'm thankful for this experience. I know there were thousands who tuned in last time, and there are those who tuned in again this week, and hopefully people just remember more and more now. 7 p.m. on Thursday nights, you can join Andy. And so follow me on GetHer if you haven't already. Please support me on locals, ngo.locals.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. Thank you for your questions and comments. There were a lot, obviously, that I didn't get to, but I'll look over them, and I'll probably answer some of the ones I didn't get to today next time as well. And so I'll see you all next week. Thank you, everyone. Have a really good Friday tomorrow and a good weekend. Bye.